My name is Paula, and in 1939, my life was deemed as one not worth living. This is my story. As a person with a disability, the Nazi Party found my life to be a burden. I did not choose this fate, but the Nazis didn't care. My mother was sick while pregnant with me, causing me to be born mostly deaf. But when I caught high fever at 16 months old, I went completely deaf. I learned to read lips, but I always felt trapped in my silence, as I had no way of communicating my own thoughts. My lack of hearing made my vision much stronger. Any slight movement in nature made me ecstatic and even scared me sometimes. The priest in my town eventually taught me my name and some hand signs to help me communicate. I could even tell my family I loved them by placing my palm over my heart and pointing to each one of them. Unfortunately, when I was 13, Action T4 began. T4 was a program based on euthanizing the disabled and mentally ill. But it wasn't just. It was murder. The Nazis killed Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies too. They claimed that they were cleaning out the gene pool and that disabled people were too miserable to enjoy life anyway. But that was a lie. I loved my life, and I wanted to live. My parents were afraid they'd take me away, so I wasn't allowed outside anymore. Eventually, the neighborhood priest came by and offered to take me somewhere safe, somewhere the Nazis would not be able to find me and take me away from this world. So I packed up my few belongings, said goodbye to my family, and left. I was taken to the countryside, where I lived with a lady I had never met before. She started to teach me sign language, but soon the Nazis came knocking on her door. I was forced to hide until they left, but even once it was safe, I was told I had to go. Apparently one of the neighbors had seen and reported me. My priest came to get me, but this time he took me to a homeless shelter, where I was looked after by another priest I had never met before. At the shelter, I learned a lot about what was going on in the world around me, things I could hardly believe were true. They were stealing disabled children straight from their beds and killing them. Doctors could issue a death warrant whenever and for whomever they wanted, so they did. But none of us understood why. Although there were many people in the shelter telling these stories, the person I interacted with the most was poor Kurt. He had a long gray beard and wore dirty rags that were stitched together. He always seemed to be rubbing away a bad smell from his nose, so one day I asked him why. He drew a building in the air with his hands and pointed to the chimney. That's how the Nazis got rid of bodies. They burned them. One day, poor Kurt woke me up and asked me to go to Berlin with him. Although it was dangerous, I decided to join him. It was the middle of winter and we had to walk there, but poor Kurt said he knew the way. It was an unbearable journey. I shook with chills and my feet and face were numb. In the distance, poor Kurt and I saw a small light coming from a cabin, so we decided to seek shelter there. We knocked on the door, but no one answered. Poor Kurt yelled for help, and finally, a frightened woman cracked open the door. I smiled as wide as I could, and she pulled us both inside. In this tiny cabin lived a Jewish family of 4 adults and 3 children. There wasn't even enough floor space for them to all sit down comfortably. They drank melted snow and ate moldy bread. I did not want to believe that these conditions were better than being in the hands of the Nazis. Even though I liked the Jewish family, it was almost unbearable there. So I told poor Kurt we needed to go back to the shelter. I wanted the family to come with us, but they were too scared to be out in the open, so they stayed behind. I promised I would come back for them if I could. We got lost on our way back. Poor Kurt and I didn't know which way to go. We must have walked the same path more than once. At one point, we spotted a moose, hiding in the icy bushes. He could have attacked us, but he didn't. He walked straight by us. At first I felt afraid, but then I started to feel safe with the moose, like I used to feel in my father's arms. With our teeth chattering, poor Kurt and I finally found the shelter. The priest was glad we had returned safely, but equally as angry with us that we had left in the first place. I asked him to go save the family in the cabin, but he said it would be too dangerous. We cried for their safety, praying that somebody, anybody, would take pity on them. Around this time, Hitler officially ended Action T4. Most of the doctors were brought to justice, but not all of them. Many doctors still had the authority to kill off whomever they wanted. However, it was finally safe for me to return home. Poor Kurt had nowhere else to go, so he came along. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd seen my family. We held each other for a long time. I had grown so much, my parents could hardly believe it. I was able to actually bathe for the first time in months, and poor Kurt could wash and shave. When he came downstairs, I could hardly believe my eyes. Poor Kurt was a young man, hardly even 20 years old. He finally revealed his true identity.
My real name is Walter. I lived in Hadamar, where they took all the disabled children. The sky smelled of burning bodies, and I was afraid that would be my fate someday. I am not disabled, but I am part gypsy. I didn't even know I could grow a full beard, but once I did, I covered it in gray ashes. I thought I was safer dressed as an old beggar. I traveled for weeks looking for a new home, which is when I found the shelter. That's where they named me Poor Kurt. I never told them who I really was, or that I was part gypsy, because I was afraid that they would kick me out if they knew. I lived in constant fear until I met Paula.
One of our neighbors offered to hire Walter to work at her farm, tending to animals. I started to grow quite fond of Walter. I even had dreams about him sometimes. He could use sign with me, and he helped my family and neighbors learn sign too. After a couple of years, Walter and I were finally married at our local church. As time passed, we learned more and more about the war. We were told that along with the thousands of towns and families that had been destroyed, around 500,000 disabled and 6 million Jews had been murdered. I could never stop thinking of those 7 in the cabin, though. In 1945, the war was finally over. Germany had surrendered, but their crimes and losses would never be forgotten. A plaque honoring those lost to Action T4 was placed in the pavement of the original buildings in Berlin. It is vital that we educate others on this horrifying topic to prevent it from being repeated in the future. Nothing like T4 can ever happen again. And this is how my story